Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers, where voters in the city of Joplin are being asked to go to the polls on August 5th to decide on a renewal of a capital improvement sales tax. And today we're going to find out more about it. Joining me, the Joplin Public Works Director, Nick Heatherly, and Harold McCoy, who is from the Sales Tax Renewal Committee. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
We're talking about a renewal of a sales tax that's been in place since 2004, so maybe we'll start off with a little bit of background. I don't know which one of you would like to give us some background on what started 10 years ago, how this project got underway.
Well, as you said, 2004, the community went to the ballot then and initiated for the first time a capital improvement sales tax, and they voted that in a 3/8 cent sales tax at that time. He actually began collecting it in January of 2005. And that sales tax has generated over $44 million over the past 10 years to make some very substantial improvements to the community's transportation system.
And that was a case of the citizens getting involved with the city administrators and city council eventually putting that on the ballot.
Correct. City council at that time appointed a committee of citizens to look at the issue, to make a recommendation as to whether or not to proceed with such an initiative, and also make a recommendation as to what projects might come before the voters for consideration. That process was done, and then it was done again earlier this year.
Right, and that's where Mr. McCoy comes in. And of course, people recognize you having worked with the city, but you played a key role on the citizen side of this presentation.
Well, I'm just a spokesman. There was 8 others besides myself. Each one of us had a vote on how this proposed project list that we'll be voting on in August was brought forth. We looked at 40-some projects. There's about 15 or 16 that are on the list that they would be funded if the tax is renewed, and we recommended those to the council. The council adopted the committee's recommendation.
So it was a process where you probably met with city staff and just looked at what are the needs, and you went with the
That's
committee.
correct. Well, and again, what we started with was back in 2004, a substantial list of projects and needs were identified then. These are what in our business we call unfunded needs, because they're recognized as legitimate needs within the community that would make improvements to the community, but there's no dedicated funding source for those. And so the list of projects at that time totaled up over $90 million at that time. And 19 of those projects were actually either completed or currently under construction or design right now. And the remaining list of projects that were not completed at that time were brought before this committee. Additional projects that were identified by staff and by members of the committee themselves were discussed, and a total of 14 specific projects were identified and were recommended to City Council.
Mr. McCoy, was it quite a challenge to try to come up with that short list? I mean, I'm sure you had a long list of needs and possibilities.
The list that has been recommended is about 25% of the cost of the total projects. Each committee member was allowed to rate each project against the other. It took us about 2 hours to do that individually, and then the staff summarized the results of each committee member and come up with a total recommendation. The sad part about it is that we only have enough money to fund about 25% of the cost of the list. We would have liked to have more funds, but just like at home, we have to work within our budget.
Right, and budget, like everything else, inflation has played a role in the last 10 years on these types of projects.
Absolutely. Right now, the cost of doing road construction, street work has grown substantially in the past 10 years. Mr. McCoy and I have been talking in the past, 10 years ago when this tax initiative started, the cost of oil that's included in the asphalt, for instance, well, it's probably twice what it was at that point in time. So we're not able to go as far with the same amount of money now. We've still got, again, 14 good projects that are going to make a substantial improvement to the safety and efficiencies of our transportation system. but it's just like everything else. The cost has gone up, so we can't go as far as we'd
You
like.
have to control what you can do.
That's exactly.
As you were developing your plan with the committee, did you look at Joplin growth and development over the last 10 years? Obviously, there's been a lot of changes, not even looking at what happened with the tornado, but the city and growth and development.
Absolutely. You know, the events of May 22nd of 2011 did impact some of the transportation patterns within the community, with the Mercy being relocated now south of I-44, with some of the development activities in the 44th Street range line area that are going on. The long-range transportation plan that the community has was updated and included the continued extension of Connecticut Street south to 44th, and then from 44th on over to range line as another project to be considered.
And some of these weren't even part of the city limits 10 years ago.
Correct.
So as the city grows, you have projects
That's
in those
correct.
areas. Well, one of the questions people who are watching might ask us before we get to talk about projects, what about the area that is considered the tornado zone? The area, you have a map here, and I know the city has a map available, but what about that center section of town?
Well, the issue with that, the projects that have been identified for the capital improvement sales tax are outside the recovery zone. And what we're looking at there is that we have a substantial amount of money coming in from the disaster money from HUD and other sources that are going to be used to make those improvements within the recovery zone. So the same types of improvements, if not even more, will be done within the recovery zone from other funding sources.
So another pot of money is helping pay for those,
Another pot of
basically, in
money,
layman's
that's
terms.
correct.
Right. Well, when we talk about the tax proposal, let's give some information on Mr. McCoy. Probably one question people might ask since you've been on the committee is, why do we need to continue this? We haven't accomplished what we need to for 10 years. Why do we need a renewal, as a citizen, member of the community?
I think, as Nick pointed out, costs have risen, and without renewing the tax, we will only have one or two small projects within the next 10-year period, and there's no funds to address these needs. So it's essential that this tax be renewed for us to carry forth what I would call the corridor, continuing south on Connecticut, Zora on out towards 249, 32nd Street West, are corridors that we have started on, and we need to continue to work on those. And I list those as examples. But without renewing the tax, we can't address these needs.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the projects we've completed in the first 10 years project. We have some pictures I know that the city has available, and talking about some of these, people will see some of the pictures of some of the projects on the screen and recognize intersections and say, oh, I don't realize perhaps that money helped pay for that. So let's start off and explain what we're seeing.
Right.
In
Well, the first
picture.
one is the Zora and Main intersection. This one was completed not too many years ago, and it was again a partnership with MoDOT. But with that project, we've done away with a signalized intersection that had some very poor sight distances there, and obviously anybody that has frequents that intersection recognizes what a significant improvement that's made up there at that intersection.
So that's a road that really handles the traffic load that you're seeing increase in
That's
that part of
correct.
town.
And again, another view of the same, different views from different directions, but a very substantial and a nice gateway to the community now too.
And you mentioned that was a project where you partnered with the state and with the federal funds, really.
That's
helping you make
correct.
this possible.
We've been able to leverage our local funds with other state and federal funding sources, which have actually allowed us to do some more things than what we originally planned.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier the growth on the south side of town, the 32nd Street, the south side of town.
Right.
Even 10 years ago, you were looking at a need.
Going
in that area.
west from Main Street, we widened that area there out to the 5-lane sections that you've got now. Obviously providing a substantial safety and efficiency improvement in that area. The next slide, I think you'll see that this is actually looking east on 32nd, looking east across the intersection. The picture on the left is, if everybody will remember, the retaining wall there on the right-hand side, that obviously from a visual standpoint, safety standpoint on that intersection was a very much of an imperative. The new improvements over on the right, traffic flows much more readily now, and the safety factors have been improved substantially.
So it's easier to make those left turns more of a dedicated
Left turns
turn
and
lane,
right
and
turns.
right turn
Yes,
through that
that's
busy
correct.
intersection.
That's correct.
Going a little further north on Main Street, though,
Right.
you also have 20th Street?
That's right. We didn't do a whole lot of work here, but these are the types of improvements that really make a difference in the efficiencies and safeties of things. These are just little short right turn bays that we've added, and again made a substantial improvement on the traffic flow.
And then mentioned the south side of town.
Right.
Still, we have Connecticut, which really kind of south to mid part of town.
That's right. This is the Murphy and Connecticut intersection improvement that was done there. And then the next one is the improvement further south, which is everybody will remember, I'm sure, the having to sit there for many, many times to wait for the train to get across that location. Now we can drive under it, and again, traffic flows are much better, and everybody's efficiencies and gas mileage and everything else goes up.
Now, I remember when working on that project, a lot of people talk about the importance of not having traffic stopped by trains for safety issues as well, for emergency responders and so on.
Absolutely. If that train has got the roadblock, the emergency responders have to go a different direction, and sometimes that extra time they've got to take can be critical to those that are in need.
So we have the railroad overpass on Connecticut. People are probably watching and saying, well, this may not necessarily tie directly into it. What about the 20th Street Railroad crossing? How are we looking at that?
Yeah, that project has been designed, and we've got contractors already selected, and we've got utility work being relocated now, and the actual construction of the overpass should be started just very shortly now.
And that will be a car over the train track.
The cars there will actually go over the rail, yes.
Once again, helping increase the efficiency to get across town.
That's right.
So we have these projects. Are there any projects currently in the works from that 2004 project that, we're still in 2014, you still have projects underway, I imagine?
Right. The Zora project from Maine over to Rangeline is one of the projects that we're getting ready to, you'll see some work done there later this year into next year. Part of the projects that are still underway are the ones that I'm sure everybody are tired of already, which is the Schifferdecker, 26th, and Maiden Lane's getting ready to start up, so we're just going to move from one area to another there.
Finish one and go to the next
Move
street.
to the next one, but those three projects are also in the works going on right now too.
And of course, this is the busy time of year when you have that construction.
This is the time of year to get it done.
Get things started. Which now moves us on to the projects that we're looking at for the proposal. Mr. McCoy, as you were looking at this when the committee was, as you say, each person had a chance to have their say, was there a way to prioritize which are the most crucial, or is it just kind of a basic list, or here are 14 things we'd like to do?
Well, each committee member rated each project against the other. And as our results were turned in, the staff summarized them for us, and that's how the 14 projects came about. Now, I will be the first one to say that each committee member's list is not identical to the 14 because we all had, to be honest, we voted for where we drove, and that's where people will vote. Here, their interest is where they drive.
What's it like down my street?
That's right. So, but we had a consensus that these 14 projects are in the best interest of the community, and these will move forward. Should additional funds arise, some of the other projects will be rated in, and the staff can consider those projects in the city council.
So let's talk about the projects. I know you have a grid that we also put up on the screen. We see Schifferdecker, which you mentioned, some surfacing and things, work going on now kind of on the north side of Schifferdecker, but this takes us down south.
Right, this is actually on 32nd Street, and it's going from Schifferdecker all the way out to Central City Road, the first two projects. And I know that anybody that's driven south on Country Club down to 32nd and tried to make a left or a right turn at that location is taking their life in their own hands at that intersection. And that's as the traffic has continued to increase there, the loads and the volumes, that intersection is becoming more and more dangerous. The traffic volumes on 32nd have increased substantially, and I think that as the growth of the community continues in that westerly direction, that's going to do nothing but get worse as the loads and the traffic volumes increases. Just to follow on to what Mr. McCoy was saying is that the committee did make all these comparisons, they also had the data from our long-range transportation plan, which included cost-benefit ratios of various segments and things like this that was there. The committee, in conjunction with staff, discussed the concept of adding some citywide projects that would kind of deal with some very specific things. They weren't what we would call these major transportation improvements, but you would deal with the neighborhood transportation improvement projects that would deal with, I'll call it more localized issues. Either it's localized street flooding, you got some sidewalk issues. And again, I want the iteration that transportation is not just vehicular. We're talking about pedestrian, we're talking about the bicycle types things. Those are all expensive in the context of things, but they're also a needed thing in the community, and there's something that we get asked about as to why don't we add more sidewalks, why don't we add more pedestrian and bicycle lanes, things like this. Well, it all comes down to money, and these are the types of funding mechanisms that can provide that. The committee did have a very set project that they recommended to staff that they wanted to see, and that was the street surface repair program. There was a recognition, staff acknowledged that that project was set up to specifically deal with rideability, the smoothness of the ride that you have going from point A to point B. Dealing with utility cut flaws, dealing with unlevel manhole covers, valve covers, anything out there in the road surface that provides a rough ride. And they wanted to see us try to address some of those things. So they had some money set up on an annual basis for that. And then intersection improvements, just like the 20th Street project that we talked about. You can make some substantial improvements in both safety and efficiency of a transportation system by making improvements just at an intersection. So they said, yep, we're going to put some money in there just for that.
So when we look at that neighborhood transportation improvements, those are those types of projects.
Those are those types of projects.
Mr. McCoy, you mentioned people are obviously concerned perhaps what's in their part of town. If somebody has an older street running through their part of town, I'm sure they call the city staff and let you know, and the committee probably expressed these concerns too, that our road is bumpy, we need to fix this corner. You know?
Well, some committee members recommended some additional projects for consideration because citizens had talked to them about their special interests. And those were brought forth and considered. Some of the things that were recommended come out of that input from citizens, and that's pretty typical. Just like we were discussing before going on camera, when is the street in my neighborhood going to be done? And that's typical with all citizens, and they want to vote for where they drive, and that's just common.
Right. And of course, Joplin, as the city grows, you have more areas that have miles. I don't know how many miles of roads you have in the city, but you're many, many.
Right. There's several hundred.
Yep. Let's talk about some of the other projects. We've been talking about, the southwest part of town, but you also have some projects tying into Zora and a connection, I guess, to the bypass?
That's correct. This is really just a continuation of these past projects that we're currently working on up there on Zora. The next stage or phase of this project would be to take it from Range Line on out to Missouri 249 and make that connection up, which is obviously a benefit to anybody coming in and out of the community, and obviously the economic development aspects of that are very good. So again, that gets us another north corridor, we'll call it, an east-west corridor across the community, and that obviously adds to the efficiency of our transportation system.
So widening from Range Line to the 249, putting
Correct.
in more lanes and shoulders, safer
Correct.
road. I guess there's no shoulder up there right
We'd
now.
go out to we'd go out to a 3-lane section instead of the 2. It gives a center turn lane, which again improves the efficiencies and safeties of that operation.
Now to the west, I know there's some on your list. There's a project that deals with to Zora and that area as you go west. Are there still long-range plans to extend that road across town that way as well?
Yes, there is. Again, you're always limited by how much money you got in this business, so that is identified there as a project to ultimately be done. As a part of that, though, right now, one of the 14 projects that was recommended to council is a bridge over Turkey Creek at Schifferdecker and Zora. It's replacing the bridge that's there, and that would be, I'll say, an element long range, looking at exactly that western extension, and then again looking at wrapping that down into to Schifferdecker and improving that whole corridor.
So when we're looking at construction projects like this, you have to look at it in pieces before you get that whole puzzle coming together in many cases.
It's just the cost. I mean, it'd be nice to do it all and have it all laid out, but you have to prioritize and take your money where it's at. Because the two bridge projects that we've got on there, we're sharing the cost with both Jasper and Newton County. So they're partners with us on this. They're ready to step forward financially to help put these in, which is exactly what we would like to see.
Right. So cooperative ventures, partnerships are an important part of planning with the city
Absolutely.
and the community and tying things together. Well, the summer projects you have ongoing every year, slurry seals, resurfacing and so forth, these are still continuing operations with the city.
Those are continuing operations with our current budget and our other taxing sources. One of the changes between this capital improvement sales tax and the previous one is that there are not any monies in this one to go into our overlay program. We did have in the previous one a little bit of money on an annual basis to do in that. And after discussion with staff, our recommendation to the committee, and they accepted it, was that from a maintenance standpoint, it's not good to put your eggs in the basket that the basket has the potential of not being there. And i.e., this is a 10-year sales tax initiative. And if the sales tax does not be approved, then if you've been relying on those monies for a maintenance operation, then you've just shot yourself in the foot on being able to take care of what you've got. It's good for a while, and there's nothing wrong with using it with understanding that should those money goes away, you've got to figure out another way, or you've got to extend the life of those roads in a different manner.
So really you're focusing on new projects
New
with these types of improvements. And Mr. McCoy, as you're looking at the plans and developing it, obviously it went back to the City Council. The City Council then voted to put it on the August ballot.
Correct.
Yes.
People might question why the August ballot. Is it summertime a better time, or is it just the nature of elections?
It's timing a little bit of procedure in order to get the tax to be collected on January 1st. We needed the lead time of going to August 5th, and that's why August 5th was chosen. If you go back and check back in '04, we did the August election there, and it worked very well for us to get it on an annual basis starting January 1st.
So from a budgeting perspective,
Right.
it's a new year, the new
Right.
funds come in, even though it's
That's right.
continuing tax, that gives you that new money starting to come in at that point.
Correct.
As far as the tax, there will be a mailing, I know the city citizens will receive, but the tax language is pretty much a straightforward, shall the city of Joplin extend a sales tax 3/8 of 1% for a period of 10 years for the purpose of funding capital improvements, yes or no?
That's correct.
Correct.
Very simple.
So
it's
simple.
a renewal.
Renewal. Is it a simple majority for a renewal?
That's correct.
So simple questions, simple answers. But you are providing information to the citizens. I know I have a sample of what citizens will be receiving in the mail, trying to get the word out.
Correct. And we're obviously making the circuit around to various service organizations and meeting with whomever will allow us to come in and meet and talk about this issue, try to make them as an informed voter as we possibly can get them.
Mr. McCoy, are you getting a lot of questions as a member of the committee? People, wanting to find out more from you. You were on the committee that made these recommendations. They're asking committee members for input as well.
Yes, in fact, although I've been the spokesperson, we've asked other committee members to make themselves available out to the public. Yes, we are getting questions. Why did you choose these and that type thing? There's one other comment I would like to make. Like the Zora project corridors, that's 20 years in development. Those projects didn't happen overnight. And this is something that's been in the planning for a long period of time. It was originally a corridor study, and then as money became available, the projects were taken forth. There's one thing we haven't talked about in the long-range planning. We're talking about a west bypass, that if MoDOT will start laying the groundwork for that. And some of these projects we're talking about on this list will start the extension out to connect to that ultimately.
Okay. So you do have that master long-range goal dream plan that encompasses
Right.
these steps to get to those
Right,
plans.
and that plan's updated about every 3 to 5 years. It's actually about every 5 years. It's actually on the table to be updated again next year.
So the city staff look at what's happening in our region, how are we developing and how
Correct.
are we growing. Which brings up one more question as far as oversight of the tax. After you have a continuation of an existing tax, I guess people want to know who's watching how the money's being spent.
Well, that's correct. Council appointed a separate committee years ago to be a sales tax oversight committee is what they are, and they not only oversee staff's expenditure of the capital improvement sales tax, but all of the sales taxes that this community collects, including the public safety sales tax, the transportation sales tax, and the parks and stormwater sales tax.
So you as city staff then report to them on a regular basis.
We do. We report to them quarterly, and they oversee everything that we do.
So citizens involved from the beginning, coming up with the input as well as the follow-up throughout.
Absolutely.
And continuing that. To get more information, obviously City of Joplin has a website.
Correct, and obviously they can call anytime and call to talk to me, call and talk to our PIO office, either one, and if they've got questions, we'll be glad to get them an answer.
Great. And Mr. McCoy, I know that you have been involved with the city and in the community for a long time. When you look back at your career and 20 years ago, I was covering city council meetings, and we were there. Could you have dreamt that we'd be at this point in 2014 with the types of projects the city is looking at and how it's grown and developed?
Well, from my background, these are all projections of what's been done previously. That the corridor extensions on Connecticut, Zora, 32nd Street, are all part of the long-range planning process. And hopefully the voters will approve this tax and let the city continue to do those corridor improvements. And am I surprised? No. Joplin citizens have been very supportive of transportation projects over the years. And we've been very beneficial of their support. And without their supports, these projects would have not taken place.
And Mr. Heatherly, as Public Works Director, your final thoughts that you'd like to share with people who are watching, finding out more information?
Well, I think just to echo Mr. McCoy's perspective, I think the community has been very supportive in the past, and I think the need for a valid, safe, and efficient transportation system within the community will just be the, well, without that, you start saying, well, what are we going to do next? And you've got to have that plan out there to make it happen.
So the future growth and development of the city.
That's correct.
And once again, this is a local City of Joplin sales tax, so it
That's
stays
correct.
within the City of Joplin.
This is a renewal of an existing tax, so the sales tax that you're paying now will not change.
Be something we can certainly have. Well, I'd like to, one more thought?
I think one point you pointed out, and the people in the citizens community, this money is dedicated to those projects and cannot be spent for other purposes. And the money will stay locally. It doesn't go anywhere else. And I think that's important for the citizens to know. These monies are dedicated to these projects and can't be detoured over to something else.
So this plan we have is what you will follow with the
Right.
instructions and the plans of what we have for the
That's
future.
correct.
Good. Well, I'd like to thank you both for visiting today and sharing some information for our viewers and the voters.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week at the same time on this station. We'll see you then.